You're listening to ERIWFT.
Hey everyone, this is Jesse coming at you with another episode of ERIWFT. In this episode, I want to talk about iOS versus Android. You're listening to someone who has moved from the iPhone 3G to a Droid X. Now, I first got the iPhone 3G back in the fall of 2009. I believe it was October 2009 is when I got it. And it was my very first smartphone. I moved from a Nextel phone. And yeah, those are really bad, shitty phones. But I had a Nextel because pretty much everyone in my nuclear family, or not pretty much, everyone in my nuclear family did have a Nextel phone. There was also a number of people in my extended family who had a Nextel phone as well. And the best thing about the Nextel phone is they have the push-to-talk functionality. So rather than wasting minutes to make a phone call, especially if you just want to ask like a really quick question or something, you could use the push-to-talk like walkie-talkie functionality. You could talk with someone real quick, get an answer, and be on your way. But I was fed up with that. I just started a new job a couple of years previously. I was making pretty decent money then, and I wanted to move to a smartphone, which made sense, especially since I work in the IT field. I wanted something that was a little bit more capable than my Nextel phone. So what I did was I purchased the iPhone 3G on the AT&T service. Now, at the time, I absolutely loved the phone. I was living in an apartment at the time, and in my apartment, I had pretty decent service, I guess. I always had a phone signal, so that was okay. And I never really had any problems sending text messages. Well, then I moved into a house. And once I moved into the house, I don't know what it is about my house, but I can't hardly get a signal on any phone, regardless of who the provider is, the service provider is. But I can't hardly ever get a signal in my house. And that was especially true on the iPhone through the AT&T service. No matter where I was at, I usually had one bar. And when you have one bar, at least on AT&T, in my experience, you can't make a phone call. Or if you can, it very rarely ever connects. And also with one bar, you can't send a text message. In my experience, if I had anything less than 2 bars, I couldn't send a text message or receive a text message for that matter. So if I wanted to do anything, I essentially had to go outside my house, where if I stepped off the front porch, I would say, I don't know, maybe 20 feet or so, I would have a full signal. I could make a phone call, it wouldn't drop, I could receive, I could send text messages, it would work just fine. Well, while I enjoyed and loved the iPhone, I won't lie to you, the marketing of the Android or Droid phones got to me. So before my 2-year contract was up on my AT&T 3G iPhone, I decided that in the summer of 2010 that I was going to move over to the Droid. Did I say that I got the iPhone in 2009? I meant 2008. If I said 2009, I meant 2008. Anyways, right before my 2 years were up, I decided that I was going to move to the Android operating system, and I settled on the brand new at the time Droid X, which came out in the summer of 2010. So I had to pay a little bit of a cost on getting out of my contracts on the iPhone, but it was worth it because I absolutely hated AT&T. So instead, I moved over to Verizon, and I got the Droid X phone. Now, in this little podcast here, I'm not going to really review the phone hardware itself. I'm really going to be talking more about the operating systems on each of the devices. But the reason I essentially moved to the phone is because I wanted to try Android. The marketing hype behind it, the whole Droid commercials, it really sold me on wanting to try it. So I played around with a few Droid phones, just here and there a little bit, right before I got the Droid X, just to try them out. And some of them seemed very plain, very vanilla. At the time, the Android operating system really wasn't all that mature, and I would argue that it's really not all that mature now, although it is a lot more mature than what it was at that time. So, like I said, I bought the Droid X. At the time, it was like $250. Once you did like a mail-in rebate thing, I believe you can get it now for like $149 or something like that. And I got it, and I absolutely fell in love with it. The one major thing that sold me on it, and I got to tell this story real quick. There was a girl that I used to ride my motorcycle with. She had her own motorcycle. I have mine, of course. And we were just out riding. We didn't really know where we were going, and we were just going down some roads that we didn't really know. And they were out of town, and neither one of us really knew them. So we were trying to find out how to get to a particular a spot here in Michigan, taking the back roads just so that we'd have a longer, more enjoyable ride. Neither one of us knew how to do it, so she whipped out her phone. Or, excuse me, we both whipped out our phones. So I pulled up the Google Maps on my iPhone 3G, and of course, because we were in the middle of nowhere, I had no 3G service. So I had to rely on the Edge network, and if you've used the Edge network, you know that it takes forever for data to load, simply due to the fact of the speed of the network. Well, she whipped out her Android phone, and despite the fact that we were in the middle of nowhere, she had full 3G service. She pulled up the Google Maps, she hit the button to pinpoint our location on the map, and boom, instantly, there we were. We saw where we were at on the map, and we could instantly figure out the route that we wanted to take to our destination. That completely blew me away. The ability to have 3G service in the absolute middle of nowhere of Michigan, that just completely blew me away. So that was the prime selling point for me of seeing that in person. That combined with the marketing hype that they were doing on TV, I was completely sold. So like I said, in the summer of 2010, I got the Droid X, and I've been using it ever since. So, what are the main differences between iOS and the Android operating system? Well, on my iPhone 3G, let me go ahead and pull it up here because I can't remember exactly what version of the operating system I'm on. Got to look it up. I am using iOS 4.2.1, and I believe that I can't upgrade past that on my iPhone 3G simply because Apple's no longer supporting it. And on my Droid X, let me go ahead and pull this up here just so I can get you the exact version number. About phone. I am using Android version 2.3.3, also known as Gingerbread. Now, what's different about the operating systems here is that, the iPhone is made by Apple. Apple is also the one that releases the software for the iPhone. Duh, obviously, it is an Apple device. With the Android phones, however, Google creates the OS, and then they release it freely to the various carriers. So at this point, my phone again is the Droid X. It's made by Motorola. So Motorola, what they do is they get a hold of the operating system. They make their changes and configurations to it, and then eventually at some point they release it to their devices over the air. Well, Gingerbread has been out for quite a while now, and it was supposed to be released on the Droid X a number of months ago, but for whatever reason there was some problem with it and they ended up pulling it, and Google didn't allow them to release it. So many months passed and they finally released it now. I've got it on my device. However, there's a number of bugs, but I'll talk about those in here in just a few minutes. But first, what I want to do is compare and contrast iOS and the Android operating system. So again, I'm using 4.2.1 on my iPhone 3G, and I'm using 2.3.3, the Gingerbread Android operating system here on my Droid X. So the big thing that the Android has that the iPhone doesn't is that it allows for greater customization, such as widgets, You can change your notification sounds if you want to. I was going to say that you could change the wallpaper on the Android, but you can also do that on the iPhone now as well, unless you're using the iPhone 3G, of course. So the biggest thing there is customizations. So if you're someone who really enjoys customizations, you might want to take a look at the Android operating system, because you can essentially change anything on the Android operating system that you want. And then the biggest thing that I just had mentioned that was the main selling point one of the main selling points for me was the turn-by-turn navigation. Now, Apple bought a mapping company a while back, and I'm almost positive that they're going to be going to turn-by-turn navigation. However, I have no idea when that's going to happen. When it happens, I assume it's only going to be supported on probably the most recent version of the hardware. That's assuming it does happen at all. But I think that's the one thing that Android currently has that's keeping me on that platform over going back to iOS, and that is the turn-by-turn navigation. Yes, there are turn-by-turn navigation apps that you can purchase for the iPhone, but again, those are purchased apps. With Android, you get it for free. It's straight from Google. I can't talk. Straight from Google, and there's a number of times that I've used it, and it's far more accurate than my TomTom. I just recently took a trip to Florida, and I punched in a location, or was trying to find a location on my TomTom, and it simply couldn't find it. It didn't know where that location was at. I typed it into my Android, Droid X, found it immediately, and within just seconds it had pinpointed that location, created a route for me, and I was able to follow it. So that is a key feature in Android, and I absolutely love that feature. Now, with that said, those I think are the two highlights of the Android operating system. You might say, well, that's not much. True. But if you heavily rely on your smartphone, especially if you're a traveler, I think that turn-by-turn navigation is absolutely essential. The notifications and customizations and things like that, the widgets, some people might think those are a big deal. Personally, I don't, with the exception of being able to change the sound for notifications. Because I know that I would like a different sound for my email than I would for my text messages, which you do get with iOS, but you can't currently change those sounds. They're essentially stuck between... I guess there are a few different things, a few different sound effects you can select from, but they're essentially stuck as those. You can't really change them. I believe that is going to change in the next version of iOS, but at this point in time, you can't currently change those notifications really all that much. So, looking now at iOS, I think iOS has a greater cohesive feel. When you're using an iOS device, it just seems like everything goes together. On the Android operating system, that's not the case at all. Some of the apps, especially some of the downloaded apps that you get from the Android market, they just seem like they're very shoddy. A lot of times they'll just crash. Not only the applications, but they'll also crash your device. Which kind of leads me to my next point. I'm sort of putting these two together. The iOS apps have more scrutiny. So very rarely have I ever had an iOS application crash my iPhone. I guess the only exception there would be if it's an application that was designed more for the more recent versions of the iPhone, and I'm trying to put it on my 3G. And in a lot of cases, the developer will let you know that, yeah, while it might work on the device, there's no guarantee that it won't crash it. There have been a few applications where I haven't seen that notification, and they have ended up crashing my device or hanging my device, and I had to reboot it. But I would say those are few and far between. On my Android phone, I can't even say that about the stock software. For whatever reason, after the upgrade to Gingerbread, my phone seems to be rebooting on average maybe 2 to 3 times a day now. I have absolutely no idea why, and it seems to occur when right after I receive a text message and I turn my phone on and I go to unlock it, and that's when it seems to crash and it reboots. And once it's rebooted, it seems to be fine. I go in, view the text message, works just fine. But I that's one of the major downfalls that I see with the Android operating system. Lots of crashing, especially with third-party applications that you get from the Android market. Because, again, there's less scrutiny here. There's not really anybody reviewing these applications. I guess Google has started to review them a little bit more. They've tried to go in there and police this a little bit. But if you get shoddy code, it's just going to crash your device. I don't care what device it is. It's just going to crash it. And that's something that you get a lot on the Android operating system. Again, iOS, not so much. Yes, there are shitty apps on iOS. Yes, they may crash your device, but there's few of those in the App Store for the iPhone. And the last point I wanted to hit on was the bugs in Android. So as I said, I recently upgraded to Gingerbread for the Droid X. Again, it was just recently released for the Droid X. And I don't know, and again, this is straight from Motorola, okay? So I don't know how they missed this bug, but this is a major bug. The Droid X has an 8 megapixel camera on it. It's actually a pretty decent camera. Not very good in low light or indoor lighting, but it's exceptionally good in outdoor natural lighting. I've taken pictures with it, and people have thought that I've used a high-end camera. That's how good it is in natural light. But there's a major bug in this version of Android for the phone. So let me go ahead and fire up my camera here. Now, I will preface this by saying that my phone has rebooted today. So, alright, so I've got my camera app open here. Now, I like to shoot my camera using the 8 megapixel setting. So let me go here to the picture resolution. I've got a couple different resolutions I can shoot in. I can shoot in widescreen, which is the default. I can shoot in large, which is 8 megapixel. I can shoot in medium, which is 5 megapixel. I can shoot in small, which is 3 megapixel. And I can shoot in tiny, which is 1 megapixel. So again, by default is widescreen. I like to come in here and change it to large, again 8 megapixel. And that again is a 4:3 sort of resolution. So, alright, I've got it in 8 megapixel setting. I can take my pictures, I'll be all fine. Let's say my phone reboots. Okay, so my phone reboots. If I go back to take a picture, let's say my cute little nephew is doing something that I want to get a picture of real quick. I go here, fire up my camera. Oh, what is this? It's now back in widescreen mode. Why is it back in widescreen mode? I didn't leave it in widescreen mode. I set it to 8 megapixel. Yeah, that is a major bug that is part of the Gingerbread operating system for the Droid X. Anytime the phone reboots, you completely lose all of your camera settings. I don't know how that bug got through, but it did, and it's a big pain in the ass for anyone who likes to use their camera on the Droid X. So, just letting you know about a little gripe that I have with Gingerbread. So that was a very short compare and contrast of Android versus iOS. So I've been using the Android operating system for a little over a year. Since I've first purchased it and I've had a number of upgrades to the operating system, I will say that it has matured quite a bit. However, it still feels like it's in its infancy. Whereas if you look at an iPhone, you look at iOS, Apple has nailed it. They've got it down. It's in version 4 right now. They are having their upcoming iOS 5, and they've just nailed it. They've got it perfected. To me, iOS is still a little bland. I wish they would I know they're not going to completely redesign it because people have become familiar with how the operating system works. You know, it's on multiple devices now, the iPhone, the iPad, the iPod. So they're not really going to change it all around now that they have people used to using it. It's even coming to OS X in Lion. So they're not really going to completely overhaul the operating system. But to me, when I look at iOS, it just looks rather bland. I don't know how they could spruce it up. I'm not really a UI architect. So I don't really have any any thoughts on that. I do love the fact that they've included a notification system in iOS 5. It's essentially stolen straight from Android, but I don't have a problem with that because it works in Android. It is fantastic. So Apple's got it right with iOS. Android, on the other hand, I think it's way too fragmented, and until Google starts reeling everything in and taking more control over that, which they have started, but until they completely do that, which I don't know if they're going to because they want it to remain open, but until they do that, it's just going to feel very fragmented. The experience from device to device is probably going to be different. So I'm not quite sure how they're going to handle that, but those are my thoughts anyways. So iOS versus Android, which would I choose now? Now that I've used both of them, which would I choose? Well, I've told some friends this. I've told coworkers this because I have some coworkers that have both used Android and iOS devices. I've told them that I'm probably going to go back to iOS. I'm probably going to go back to the iPhone. I'm waiting until the next version of the iPhone. My contract on the Droid X isn't up until, I can't upgrade until March of 2012. So I'm probably going to wait until then, maybe even a little bit longer. The next version of the iPhone is supposed to come out in the fall, with the very next version of that supposedly, at least that's rumor, following up in the summer of 2012. If that happens to be the case, since this next version of the iPhone is supposedly just a minor upgrade to the iPhone 4, even though they're calling it iPhone 5, I guess, even though it's a minor upgrade, I want to wait until the very next redesign of the iPhone, the complete overhaul of the iPhone. I would like the next version of that, next iteration of that. So I'm probably going to be holding off on switching back to the iPhone until that overhaul has been completed. So hopefully in the summer of 2012. At that point, I will be eligible for upgrade anyways, so I'll probably do that. And I do want to get the iPhone on the Verizon network. Despite the fact that Verizon just announced or just did away with the unlimited data plan, though I have read on a couple of different sites that if you're a current unlimited data plan subscriber, that if you upgrade your phone, that you might be able to keep that, but I'll have to read a little bit more on that just to be sure. But comparing the two and contrasting the two, I think at this point, iOS is still leaps and bounds better than Android. And I think it would just totally demolish the Android operating system if it had turn-by-turn navigation. But if you're someone who loves to travel and you're never without your smartphone, I would highly recommend taking a look at the Android operating system simply for that turn-by-turn navigation from Google, because you'll absolutely love it. It's far better than my TomTom, and I use it quite frequently. So those are my thoughts on Android versus iOS. I don't know if I came up with a verdict other than, like I said, I think iOS is still heads and tails better than Android, but Android has a couple of different features that sort of puts it in line with iOS, or may even has some features that surpass what iOS should have, but doesn't at this point. So, I don't know. Somewhere in there's a verdict. It sort of felt like I was leaning towards iOS, I guess, but there's those features and options that Android has that I think should at least let people look in that direction. Don't totally ignore Android. Give it a look, because it might just surprise you. Alright, so that's it for this edition of ERIWFT. Till next time, this is Jesse signing off.